Hello, welcome to the kickoff for our ITSEC Tech Grove Tech Connect webinar series. Hopefully some of you have been able to join us last year, but for those of you that are not familiar with this series, we partner with ITSEC to highlight the stories behind the teams that were selected for nominees or winners of the best papers at ITSEC 2021. We're not going to do the technical presentations this morning. We're really going to give them a chance to tell the story about who they are, how they came together, how the relationship worked, where they're going from here, and perhaps opportunities that you may have to partner with them. But very briefly, I want to just remind you of a couple of things. There is a chat function. Feel free to use that. And there's a Q&A function. If you have questions here in this webinar series, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. We will be watching those and answering as many of those questions as we possibly can. And some of our presenters may choose to answer some of those questions online. We may not address them during the actual webinar. Very briefly, I just want to tell you about the Central Florida Tech Grove in Orlando, Florida. We are the innovation hub for Team Orlando. We have a physical as well as a virtual space where we bring together companies like you, innovators like you, other government entities, faculty, students, even nonprofit organizations, all to ideate, collaborate, and come up with solutions or present innovative solutions for hard problems that our Tech Grove customers provide us. As you can see, Tech Grove is a collaboration between UCF Research Foundation, University of Central Florida, as well as our now 5 government customers, soon to be more. These are the 3 key areas we focus on. And underneath below there, you can see some of the main areas of enabling technology that really underpin this industry of modeling, simulation, and training, and human performance. I hope that if you are not connected with us, that you will sometime during or immediately after this webinar, go to our website, fill out the Contact Us page, go to our LinkedIn profile, hit follow so you'll be sure and get notified of all the things we post on there, and feel free to email us at any time at techgrove.ucf.edu. And with that, we're going to get to the main point of today, and that is to introduce to you the 3 leads of the organizations that were part of this team that came together and as a result of the project that they embarked on to do what many said was impossible, really. And the initial results of the work that they did, the paper they submitted for ITSEC was selected as the best paper. And we'll talk a little bit later on about why was that, right? But first, I want to introduce to you each of these gentlemen and have them just tell you a few words about who they are, what their organization does, and then we'll get on into the discussion we're going to have. First, we're going to start with Dr. Wink Bennett from our Air Force Research Lab. Dr. Bennett? Not hearing you, Wink. There we go. Okay, try again.
I'm Dr. Wink.
We're still having some audio problems there. For some reason it's not coming through. So I'm going to give you a minute to work on that. Dr. Bell, who's the CEO of Eduworks. Ben, you want to tell us who we seem to have now lost? There we are.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks so much, Carolyn.
Thank you.
So I'm Ben Bell. I'm actually the president of Eduworks. I think the CEO would take issue with calling me that.
Excuse me.
And I was a principal investigator on this project, and we're really pleased to have had the chance to do the work, and we're pleased to be joining you this morning on the webinar.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Nye from University of Southern California.
Hi there, I'm Ben Nye. I'm from the Institute for Creative Technologies at University of Southern California. So we have a number of different kind of groups inside there with directors, including mixed reality, which actually the lab that we did this in. I'm the director of the Learning Science group. So I was the PI on the academic partner side, helping to design the study, design recommenders, and participate in the machine learning analysis. So pleased to be here.
Thank you. And Dr. Bennett, looks like he has gone out and will hopefully be back in. I know he's having a few audio problems. So while we're waiting on him, there we are. Wait, you want to try again?
Sure.
All right. I think maybe turn your video off, see if that helps a little bit. All right. Well, it is a morning for technical difficulties, it seems like, but while we're waiting, and hopefully can get Dr. Bennett in here, Ben, Dr. Bell, what you would just tell us all the story of how this team even came together and what was the genesis of this project. I mean, this is a problem that's existed for a long time. It's not new, trying to figure out how are participants in simulation, in training-based exercises, how do you figure out if they're really engaged and paying attention, especially as we are in a world of virtual reality, augmented reality headsets, and so many things that are not only distracting, but prevent us from really observing the participant. How did y'all embark on this?
That started as an SBIR phase 1 research topic for small businesses to compete for. But the topic at the time was the result of the Air Force wanting to make sure that their investment in computer-based training and online learning for early career airmen was actually paying off. And so airmen who were coming in on specialty codes that required a lot of academics, a lot of, not to judge, but maybe somewhat dry content, just reams and reams of, say, electronics and basic physics. The Air Force wanted to make sure that those early career airmen were engaged in the training, and that was how the SBIR topic was framed. But once we were awarded the topic, the Air Force said, well, we had this pilot training next program at the time. It was called PTN. Mm-hmm. We know pilots are engaged, so it's not that they were worried about engagement or attention, but they wanted to make sure that student pilots who were flying all these missions under a VR headset on and basically sort of a PC-based simulation engine were really truly engaged and focused and attending to the right thing. So Eduworks was connected with Dr. Nye's lab because Ben and his team had been doing some really excellent work in detecting engagement and looking for cues that might signal a lapse in engagement. Mm-hmm. And so we worked with the Air Force, and we kind of pivoted from that, thinking about airmen who were going through a lot of early stage academics to thinking about student pilots who were going through what was then still kind of an experimental approach to undergraduate pilot training, PTN, which is now called Pilot Training Transformation and is no longer experimental. So that was maybe a long answer to your question, but that was the genesis of the topic.
Did that pivot those conversations about somewhat of, slightly different direction? Did that happen leading up to the award of the SBIR, or was that after you'd been awarded the SBIR? Because a lot of small businesses struggle with really trying to figure out how to interact with the agency, the POC, when they're deciding whether to even apply for an SBIR.
Well, if Wink is able to rejoin, he can say more about this.
Mhm.
But Ben and I and our teams had actually started the work, and we were fairly well into the phase one when the Air Force started talking to us about maybe looking at pilot training next.
Okay.
So we actually had kind of a demo, because in phase one SBIRs, it's a very quick sprint, and you want to sort of get something together rapidly to show the sponsor. So we had kind of a demo that made use of both Eduworks capabilities and leveraged some really good work that Ben and his team were doing at the time for the Navy, called PAL 3. So the pivot, though, it wasn't unilateral. I mean, on the government side, there was an ongoing dialogue among AFRL, the Air Education and Training Command, and then stakeholders at Pilot Training Next, and AFWorks. So it was sort of a government consensus that this was a good pivot, and then we as the performers, we're not going to say, no way. And it was also really great application. It turned out, we didn't know at the time, but it turned out to be a really, really good way of trying to exercise these capabilities.
So,
And Ben, jump in too.
Yeah, so Dr. Guy, I'm curious, with Institute for Creative Technologies, you've been engaged in some of this work. Who were you were doing that for the Navy? Were you doing it for other?
Well, we've had a few things. I mean, ICT is actually, it's a UARC, so University Affiliated Research Center. So we're kind of in a special designation. The UARC is a DoD charter, but our mission funding comes from the Army. So actually, from the day I stepped in the door, actually, here at ICT as a director, I inherited actually an engagement project from Chad Lane, who was my predecessor. And that engagement project was really focused on multimodal engagement. So we had, basically the logs that were going on there. We had a bunch of analysis of really camera data of their faces as they were doing things was a big focus there. We did, a few years of work on that actually. And the overall takeaway was that the camera was nice, but you actually learned probably about 90% of what you were going to learn from the log data if you analyzed it enough. At least in that particular scenario, it was an interpersonal scenario,
Okay.
making leadership decisions, kind of leadership counseling. And so influenced by that, our next mission funded project that followed up on that was, well, could we build something that basically combines sort of clustering people's behavior with some archetypes of having playtest users go through and basically act out those roles? You'd have people who are just, folks who are like QA testers and be like, okay, you're going to act like a disengaged user. You're going to go over and act like an expert user. And we had a progression and a way of quickly getting people sort of trained to do that. And so you can have a small number of people, you kind of know what their things are, and then you have the clustering and you add those together and you get a classifier. So we came in there for a lot of things, and that was something that we thought was very relevant, both to some simulations and also to learning management systems at the time we were coming in this. On a separate lane, we had a project with the Navy that was mentioned called PAL 3. So PAL 3 is a personal assistant for lifelong learning. We were also analyzing engagement there. We weren't doing the same kind of like machine learning to optimize it, but we had, a number of studies with Navy sailors, and it was meant to be something that they would use voluntarily in their own time. And so that's a real high bar to get to. And so it leads to obviously like big differences in engagement. You had some people who started the study and they literally got the device and they put it down. They never touched it again, basically. And you had some people who used it for like a month. And so kind of looking at that was in that very first phase one, that was the data that we actually pulled out, which was used to analyze actually that Ben Bell was mentioning. So we used that as kind of our benchmark data to try to go over and build more engagement models. A big difference of the engagement model that we were focusing on in the first round was actually trying to predict like engagement time in a session. We're trying to say, okay, from what we know so far, how long are they going to spend on this when we think they're going to study? That was basically the metric, because it's a nice metric and train for it. When we moved over and we got the notice that it was like, well, okay, overall, I would say both for Eduworks and ourselves, we both want things, we like doing fundamental research, but ultimately we want to do research that benefits people. We want research that's going to be a little more proximal, that can go over and get out there and cause people to have better training, better learning. And basically the opportunity said, well, you can go over and do the stuff that kind of goes more towards learning management. It's got a big impact, but there's not necessarily as clear of a path for as if you do things with the simulator. And we're like, well, okay, the simulator is different. It's different data. It's kind of a different patterns of engagement, but there's some things that were the same and some things that were different. One of the things that came out, so we kind of adjusted how we were looking at sort of metrics of engagement in there. And like some of the things transferred over really well. When we looked at our theoretical models, the models we were doing was like time, particularly sort of reaction time, response time, how long people were lagging. That goes over really well if you are disengaged in like a learning management system. You tend to either be sort of racing, you'll go too fast, or you'll be this kind of weird distracted, you kind of herky-jerky, there's big delays, and then there's not. And so on the other hand, that big delays and not, that's one that, in most driving tasks, flight tasks, is also a good indicator. So I would say about half of our indicators transferred over well, and we had to look at some different ones as well. Calculating those indicators was a whole different story, which got to be quite complicated in some cases, but the overall kind of framework, about half of it transferred.
So let's get into the actual project itself and how you worked with the Air Force during the SBIR and engaged the end user. And you were doing this at a time when COVID was going on and a lot of things were shut down. And so you had more than the usual challenges probably, but a couple of questions. One, how did you engage with the various stakeholders in the Air Force, and particularly the participants in the training environment to further develop and validate this? And was this, a lot of folks probably on the webinar may have not had a chance to read the paper. So was this machine learning algorithm doing the analysis real time? Was this an after the training session, looking at the data? Tell us a little bit about that actual implementation, and either one of you, Ben.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that, starting with the machine learning one and going back. So we did the analysis post hoc on the data. With that said, we could then basically run it on data in real time after it was trained. So you kind of trained it, you could actually go over and run it on the things. There was an importance of having real-time performance, and so when we had to go over and generate those, we did. We didn't actually for actually evaluating it, just for the standpoint, we actually thought about kind of presenting in real time. It turned out when we had the flight instructors go over and look at the runs and look at the things that we had, we actually did generate that in terms of videos, just so we could transmit it to them easier. It was just easier than kind of screen sharing and kind of do stuff like that. But otherwise, actually, we basically made those videos just to make it easier to grade. It was not a specific requirement there. In terms of the COVID stuff, it started like right before COVID. Like we were kind of like doing stuff, and we actually just lucked out our initial data collection. So the data collection we had was actually for anybody who was up to a certain level of flight training. So it wasn't limited just to military pilots. Some had military experience, some did not. And we got out basically notices to, all sorts of flight groups and things like that to go over and get people in. And so had good turnout with that, actually. That worked out well, particularly in LA. There's a lot of flyers clubs and things like that. And you get a wide variety of experience, which was also an interesting thing to see. So that was we got data right before COVID hit. Like literally we finished our main data collection like a week and a half before everything shut down.
Wow, very fortuitous. Yeah.
But then we had to go over and find how the flight instructors were going to go over and evaluate. We expected just bringing them in there and watching the thing, and that was no longer an option. So that was a real interesting one. So then I don't know if
the collection itself, how is that data being collected? And along the way throughout this project, did you make recommendations or changes in how the data was collected through additional sensors or any tools?
It wasn't so much additional sensors. I mean, we did a lot of planning for the data we're going to collect. I mean, overall, at least from the systems, we kind of made sure up front, and Ben Bell might be able to speak to this a little bit more, but we basically, there was different sort of plugins you could put into PTN. And we basically said, well, we're going to put in anything we can get to get us data. We're going to make sure we have the data and we don't have to go over and, be missing data. So at least in that respect, we had the data. So it wasn't so much that we didn't really add new sensors in this one, just from the time requirements of trying to turn it around. It wasn't feasible. Also, I mean, you can't really do facial data because they had the headsets on.
Right.
So that wasn't going to be something that'd be very valuable. I think we actually, what we didn't analyze it, there may be some data around that's actually from where you're looking with the headsets a little bit, which may actually be a secondary factor. I don't think in these scenarios it would have been that useful though, because they're kind of like, go through some rings, do some waypoint type of things. Like the PTN scenarios they're not like a situational awareness scenario. Like at ICT, we've done some ones like you're driving down a track and you got to look around, head in the swivel, because somebody's going to go and try to shoot at you. Like, it's not like that. So I don't know if necessarily some of that will be as valuable in these particular scenarios. I would say if we had one sensor that would have potentially been nice, but I don't know anybody that makes it anymore, I know on some tutoring scenarios that was done at Memphis, and some other places, they used to have these seat sensors, sometimes also called butt sensors, and they basically would measure your posture. And it turned out, at least in conversational tutoring and some things like that, that was actually a pretty good and kind of distinct indicator of engagement. And it wasn't like wildly hard to collect. It was just that there was like a company who made those and they stopped making them. And so that may be something. I mean, as silly as they sound, your posture does mean a lot. And it turns out it's a lot easier to pick up your posture from your weight than it is from going over and trying to pick. We've looked at kind of like Z index with cameras, and you can kind of do it, but it's, it's a whole lot of work compared to just, knowing where they're sitting.
Yeah.
Sounds like it might be a business
So paradoxically,
I'm sorry, Dr. Bell, go ahead.
Posture is one metric that actually probably doesn't apply in this context, because the pilots are sitting in a sled, they're sitting in a cockpit seat. And they're, pilots know they're not supposed to, you don't want to break the plane too much with your head.
Don't slouch,
So, they're pretty fixed in their posture. But I just wanted to sort of give a little bit of big picture context that, those of you who use machine learning or know how machine learning operates, you need a lot of data. So when Ben was talking about data collection, that data collection was running pilots through the same PTN scenarios that the Air Force was using at the time. So we had pretty much the same setup software-wise. And we ran 28 pilots through the same PTN scenarios for the purpose of generating data to train the machine learning models. So one sort of interesting challenge we had early on in that was that because we're interested in attention and engagement metrics, we had to tag the data with boredom or distraction or things that the model could use to calibrate its training. And as a surrogate for distraction, we actually had the experimenter at a defined point in each scenario basically interrupt the person flying the scenario with conversation. So the experimenter would say, out of the blue, "So what got you into flying?" Or, "What was your most memorable flight?" So that was a very good surrogate for distraction. But like Ben said, we were able to get all the training data right before COVID. And I think the impact of COVID was felt more in our plans for a formative evaluation, where we basically had to, like Ben was saying, come up with videos that instructors could remotely evaluate. And I'll actually show you what it looked like. So what you'll see is the artifact that we gave to our evaluators. So the evaluators were instructor pilots. And And in this video that we distributed, I can't tell if it's playing, but there we go. It's playing really slowly. But if you can sort of make out as it fades in, on the left panel is the feed from the simulation engine. So you see the T6 cockpit. Yeah, I apologize. It seems to be going real slow, but those sort of giant slalom gates that are floating in the air, that's part of the PTN scenario. So those are waypoints that students fly through. So that's the simulation feed. And what you see on the right are the metrics that Omega is generating in real time. And so the instructors watched what the student was doing, and they watched what Omega was interpreting, and basically giving us feedback on how useful a training aid this would be to help cue instructors to alert an instructor when the student engagement might be lapsing. And so Omega isn't measuring flying performance. It's trying to measure attention and engagement. So you can have a student who's real jerky on the controls, or they get to a waypoint and they're way over correcting. But they're paying attention. So Omega wouldn't necessarily flag that as an engagement lapse, even though an instructor would have some feedback in terms of the stick work.
So Dr. Bell, what, as the company involved in this, Eduworks, where do you see this going? What's the Air Force going to do with it? Where else do you envision applying it? Because there's so many scenarios that come to mind where this is a challenge that this could be applied to.
I think there's two parallel directions that we want to pursue. One is that what we've shown is a proof of concept. So we've validated that we could train models to do this kind of prediction. But I think Ben would agree that there's a lot of research still to be done. There's a lot of R&D on how to make the models. And this is actually driven by the feedback we got from our evaluators. We want the model to understand not just attention and engagement, but also sort of the tactical performance. And for that reason, Ben and I have sort of come to the conclusion, and I think Dr. Bennett concurs, that Omega is pretty good at detecting engagement lapses, but Omega wasn't as good at making recommendations to instructors on what to do about the engagement lapse. So we think maybe the strength of this approach is in the detector part. So being able to alert an instructor to pay, to monitor what the student is doing a little more closely. The other interesting possibility is that Omega could generate that detection alert for a training system. And then the training system knows what the student's doing or is supposed to be doing. So the training system itself would come up with what the remediation is rather than Omega making a suggestion.
Okay.
So we think there's a lot of promise in Omega if we sort of, step back a little bit and focus on its ability to detect attention and engagement, and then leave it to another training system or to a human instructor what to do about that.
What kind of reaction or feedback did you have from the students and the instructors as they engaged in this? They find it helpful? Not? What kind of suggestions did they perhaps give for how this might evolve and be more useful?
I'm going to let Ben answer that, because when I saw the responses, I thought, this is great, they loved it. And Ben said, well, actually, if you read the data, there's more to it. So Ben, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depended on what they liked about it. They actually thought it was, I think overall they thought it was useful. Like, certainly if you raise the scenario of like, well, what if you had to monitor 4 students at a time, like 4 people training at a time? Like, yeah, it'd be absolutely useful to kind of know that we're getting kind of a flag on this one, and additional, some additional information, whatever was there. I think that was something that overall seemed like a, pretty good consensus. The thing that I think overall they didn't like the most was the the rate at which it gave feedback. Like we kind of wanted to sort of give a pretty good amount where it like, because we wanted to get a lot of evaluation, but they're like, yeah, it just intervenes too much. And the timing of the interventions, basically in terms of where people could basically really process an intervention. Example, like they get waypoints. You don't want to give them one like right before the waypoint, like, just let them do the waypoint. Yeah, they might be doing it sloppy, but you're not probably going to go over and get them to do any better. You're just going to further distract them, or, just let them go over and get to the end of it, give them a moment to get there and then tell them. And so there's kind of some pedagogical things about the context that's going on from what you're kind of observing about when you want to go over and do these. That doesn't necessarily impact alerting an instructor, though. You can alert the instructor when they're not paying very good attention before the gate, but the instructor is going to come over and tell them after the gate. So there's kind of use cases, different timing issues, which is something there. The other thing that they basically were probably saying that, to make it more useful was that issue about diagnosing performance. Our diagnosis tends to be very coarse grained. We're really talking about, efficiency of their path, fuel efficiency. A lot of efficiency metrics were in there, and also obviously like missing dates and stuff like that were influential on that. But relatively speaking, there's a lot more information about performance in there at a finer grain level. Basically, a lot of those things are like, well, you're taking these too wide, you turn too late. There's basically some things there that could be analyzed there that are, however, somewhat simulation specific. It's not like these things for this might even translate to some other types of aircraft. And so, like, it's something that a simulation, ultimately there's a separate performance model needed there to say, these are the performance errors that you're tending to make, which could be fed in, but it would be a separate model because it would be simulation specific. Like what we have right here, if you have things with paths, like a lot of it is actually very, very general, whereas those would be generally quite specific.
So there was
and Carol Ann, I think the second part of your question, Carol Ann, was about where do we see this going from here. So Eduworks and IC and USC ICT, we've sort of taken it to a proof of concept level, and really, we'd like to partner with providers of training systems. I mean, that's where this technology has to scale and be architected in a way that it's a service rather than something that you have to sort of hand jam into existing training devices. So as we progress, and the work is continuing, but as we move forward, we'd really like to scale up the architecture as a services-based add-on that existing training devices can take advantage of.
I was one of the attendees has asked a question that I think you've answered pretty well about were there any correlations between the measures of attention engagement and measures of performance? And I think ultimately that's the goal, right? To make that correlation even tighter. And another question we have is, what real-time data do you need for your engagement classifier to work? Is the classifier agnostic, for example? Does it have to be structured data in certain ways, or what kind of data do you need?
Yeah, well, like Ben was saying, it's not agnostic in terms of the data stream you're getting from a device, because a flight simulator is going to give you a very different data stream than, say, a marksmanship trainer. But it's agnostic in terms of the correlations that it's learning between inputs and lapses of attention and engagement. So we haven't tested this, but I strongly suspect that what the model's learning, it's not over learning the specifics of what's being thrown off of the simulator. I think it's learning how to do those correlations and predictions. That said, there's always going to be some engineering, because the data stream that you're getting from a device is going to vary from application to application.
Yeah, I would say, as just one note on that, I mean, in terms of generalization, this was applied, not just to one scenario, but to a bunch of scenarios that were for PTN. It's not like it just works only for one of them. In terms of the data sources, the data streams that it was using from those that it relied on most, a lot of it was sort of major events. So for detecting major events, and a lot of sort of trajectory, like path data, tended to be big things. I mean, we also had things, I think, with some of the controls, I think acceleration and, like turn controls and things like that. So if you thought about how general is that, like, well, okay, those were specific inputs from there. But if you think about generalizing, like, it's not really crazy to say, well, we have something else that says, which way you're, going over and steering something, what's the path you're taking versus other paths, and what are the main events that happen. Because, for example, one of the things that's big for us and that's pretty generic is the concept of response time, which for us is usually that a big event has happened, like some change has happened. How quickly are you sort of getting reoriented? And that's kind of like the, if you're going through a waypoint or something new, is basically, are you going over and now adjusting and getting on target pretty quickly and smoothly? And that's kind of like, imagine if you're driving and something comes up and you see something in the road all of a sudden that you have to go over and avoid. Like, if you are distracted or not very engaged, you're going to get really close to it before you start moving. There'll be a bunch of periods. So we're looking at like lag times when you're just sort of continuing your basic course without changing. And then basically also like overcorrecting. Is one of the metrics there that basically, like, you can imagine a lot of these like control system, like damped oscillation. And so that's another kind of metric. And I mean, so those are, because we're dealing in a system, like a space that often is very control system-y, and you're generally often in these things dealing with your controlling a system. I would say a lot of the, metrics, once you can kind of get the inputs rebound, should be pretty generic. So.
Thank you. And I think Dr. Bennett has winked, or understand you've dialed in. If you're able to speak up and share your perspective on this project as the Air Force sponsor.
I just want to make sure you can hear me.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So we're really curious about your version of the story and where you see this going, and how. One key question that was submitted before this is, about Air Force adoption of virtual reality training, and is this the kind of solution that's needed to really go all out on virtual reality training for the Air Force as an add-on? Well, maybe it's just our day to not have Dr. Bennett here. He must be at work. Those government buildings make it a little difficult sometimes, I think. So, well, maybe Dr. Bell or Dr. Nye.
Carol-Ann,
yeah, you can help.
Yeah, while we're waiting for Wink to come back, there's a question from Nora that it was in the Q&A that we could talk about. So Nora's question asks if prior to training, is there a method to determine how the individual learns and retains information? And she pointed out that most people learn differently based on the topic and where they are in their careers. So that's a great question. It's not one that we focus too much on in this project, because we treated engagement and attention as transcending, learning styles. So we thought that engagement was a phenomenon that that was sort of you'd see repeated patterns across people who are in different stages of their learning, or people who are learning different topics. So like Ben was saying, when we first started, it was early career airmen going through lots of sort of elementary physics and electronics. And that model is the same model that we use in looking at, undergraduate pilot training students. The other part of that is in this domain, different learning styles, that's not the priority to accommodate. I mean, where they are in their life is, you're in SUPT, this is your life. And so, we sort of had guide rails on what we need to focus on. But my hunch in response to Nora is that attention and engagement, the phenomenology of those is sort of independent of learning, individual learning styles. So Ben, you're either deep in thought or you're frozen.
So I want to talk a little bit about, we've got about 20 minutes left, and a couple of key things I want to be sure we cover. One is, where are you now? This project that you wrote the paper about obviously was last year. What's happened since then? Are you continuing to move forward with this project? And so what stage is that? And then tied to that is, are there collaborators or partners, that capabilities that would be very...
So kind of at a macro level, at a micro level, staying in the context of pilot training transformation, we would like to roll out a broader development and test cycle for this work. So, we'd like to partner with not only with AETC, but with the industry partners who are already deeply involved in PTT. But in terms of the work itself, it is continuing. We're with some additional resourcing from Eduworks that Dr. Bennett will be the, he'll oversee that work. And what we're interested in doing is basically unlocking the data that Omega is discovering, because in the project that we reported at ITSEC, Omega processed the data, it flags lapses of attention, and that's basically the end of the line. That's the terminus. So the work that we'll be starting shortly will be able to ingest Omega's findings to a competency framework. And so, we've been working with the Air Force and with other DoD service branches on using competency engines to kind of track individual performance and proficiency. And so the next stage of the work is to really continue the cycle of take Omega's data, map it into individual airman learner profiles using an open source competency engine called CAS, and to really make that data available across all the systems.
Okay. Excellent. Well, maybe third time's a charm in this case. I understand Dr. Bennett's back with us by phone. So Wink, we're going to try again because we really want to hear your story. Are you there?
So can you hear me?
Yes, sir. So
yes.
The floor is all yours.
Okay. Yep. So thanks. Sorry for the here. Everything that Ben and Bennett said is spot on with where we see this going. Since they've done such a good job of describing the work and the potential, I just want to mention a few opportunities that we have for the folks on the Tech Grove call today. So the Air Force has a program called Summer Faculty Research Fellows. It's where we bring in faculty from universities to do work with us. We have a number of open spots for summer. They are allowing you to be flexible. You don't have to spend all your time here in Dayton, Ohio. They've allowed for some virtualization of that. So if you're interested, I can pass more information to you. And then we also have postdoc opportunities, senior and junior. Engagement is a big area for us. We're using that a lot in the work we do in our game lab for STEM. And the work that Ben and Ben have done here is just a great example of how we can couple this kind of adaptive learning capability with immersive environments and the emerging emphasis being placed on augmented and virtual reality. So there's lots of opportunities. And I'm not averse to working with folks in Florida. Folks that are on the phone know that very well. And we have some relationships with FIT, Florida Institute of Technology, and also South Florida. We have faculty folks there working with us on a variety of individual and team learning kind of activities. And so there's plenty of opportunity for us to collaborate on things. Ben mentioned the follow-on effort that we have that's funded through AppWorks. We're pretty excited about that. AETC is as well. And we'll see where that goes. I also have a small project with my alma mater at Texas A&M, where we're actually looking at how to instrument a traditional classroom environment so that the instructors get a handle on when students are actually engaged or not engaged in the learning process, and provide some kind of alerts, as Ben was alluding to the instructor, to change up their game a little bit to get more students involved. So there's quite a bit of activity going on. We're pretty excited about it all, and we're excited to share it with you guys today, finally. Thanks a lot.
So Dr. Bennett, just if you would, for our guest today, just share briefly the spectrum of focus areas for AFRL. Not just this, obviously, but in the whole modeling, simulation, and training human performance area, what are some of the other maybe problems that you're addressing or needs that you're looking for partners on?
Yeah, thanks. There's a big initiative at the AFRL. It includes all of the technical directorates. It's called the AFRL Digital Transformation, and it's trying to use modeling and simulation to get more high fidelity and complex environments at a digital level of capability. That's a huge project. Our involvement is, of course, on representing the human more appropriately in these kind of environments. That's a big push for folks. I have a new project that just started this year. In fact, it's just now getting its funding, assuming Congress lets the money come through. It's called Just-in-Time Multi-Mission Airmen Warfighters. And it's a technology suite that we want to work to develop with big industry, small industry, and universities to create a capability that we can deploy with our airmen to these austere forward locations we expect them to operate in a future fight, and be able to have knowledge. I like to say knowledge at the point of need and action, and so that folks can actually do a wider range of tasks on a wider range of equipment in these deployed locations. And so we'll be starting that work this year. Keep an eye out for some small business innovation topics that'll be coming out in the March-April timeframe. We're pretty excited about the project. That's one area. We continue to do very deep level work. We've had a couple of sessions at ITSEC on augmented reality, virtual reality in the wild. We're planning to continue that theme again this year. We have quite a bit of work going on that not only is using modeling and simulation to support Air Force applications, but we also do a tremendous amount of work in STEM. And we're hoping to beef up our STEM presence at ITSEC this year because we're pretty excited about that. And there's a lot of things going on there, not trying to recruit folks into the Air Force or to AFRL, but to get kids excited all the way through high school and early in college, excited about a STEM kind of career field. And so we're spending a lot of time working on education and training applications that do that kind of thing and excite people about those kind of opportunities for them. And then, of course, you know about our distributed simulation work that's gone on for a long time, and our participation in the standards we have for those. We continue to push those things around as well, because there's always more work to do there. As Ben said, there's always more work to do on just about every aspect of it. And for my part and my team's part, we're always looking for partners. And so we're excited to hope that some folks will find the stuff we're talking about today of interest, or some of the other things we're talking about now, and maybe want to partner with us. The door is always open, and we're interested in doing that kind of stuff. Even though we're not in Orlando, we still love partnering with folks that are there and represented in the Tech Grove today. So reach out, let us know. Let's see if we can find something to collaborate on. Thank you.
And of course, one of our
I think you dropped out, Caroline.
There we go. So I was going to, just as a reminder to everyone, one of the
Dropped out again. So maybe what I could do is just leave you all with a reminder of my own, which is when we first started this project, the Chief Learning Officer for AETC was Dr. Matt Stafford. So I just want to clarify, he's not the quarterback of the Rams that's playing in the Super Bowl on Sunday. It's a different Matt Stafford.
Yeah, Ben, thanks for mentioning that. Matt was a very strong early advocate of work at a time when lots of other folks were going, engage what? And so I really appreciated his advocacy. Gloves, the AETC leader of the pilot training next work, pilot training transformation stuff at the time, was very interested in how this could support AETC moving forward. So we really appreciated his vision as well. And it's just been a real nice partnership between us and the research lab, you guys, Ben and his folks out at ICT and Air Force Education and Training Command. So and we're hoping that continues. And maybe there's a broader audience and set of collaborators we can do. Over.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I think we're at a point where we're going to kind of start to wind up here. Probably give folks back a few minutes to get on to lunch, but I'd like to give each of you gentlemen a chance to just say, last few words about for Eduworks. What's your focus with this, as well as with some of your other products and solutions that you have? Ben, ICT, what kind of collaborators, industry partners are you interested in for projects that you may have? And then Dr. Bennett, you've done a great job of elaborating on opportunities with AFRL already. So Dr. Bell?
Yeah, thanks, Joanne, and thanks to all of you who joined. Eduworks does some really good work, but we're a small business, and for the work that we're doing to really benefit the warfighter, we're always seeking partnerships with mid-range and large systems integrators. So I think most of you know where to find me, and we'll again be exhibiting at ITSEC in November. So we'll see you there, hopefully sooner.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can come meet you in Tech Grove pretty soon. So get you down here. So Dr. Nye.
That sounds really good right about now.
Yeah, I would say likewise. If I had to say one of the things that we want to make impact at ICT, we're I would say very essentially serviceman focused and also societally focused. We're not just for DoD things, but also we do things for K-12. We have things for teachers and things like that. I would say that one of the biggest things, at least on the DoD side, actually, though, is being able to interface with people who have genuine customer needs and basically have people who can go over and use things and test things. That's basically, I think, a very big thing, both having, essentially transition partners to go over and move things on, as Ben Bell was saying, but also people who have, basically soldiers, sailors, airmen right now who can say, oh, we could really use this and we could get it out there and have people test it at larger scale, I think is something that's always, I think there's always been a little bit of a DoD thing where sometimes you get like the nice valve and you get like all these people going over and doing this thing, even at the early stages, and it works awesome. And then other times, like you've got a really good research and you got a really good thing that's coming along, but then when you want to go over and even test it and get like 30 people, you're out there having, a lot, you're taking months and months to go over and get your 30 people. And so going and having both, partners who are really engaged that have people to go over and use things is always helpful at the very end user side. And I think the other one is at an institutional level, I would say there's probably a need for do what some of the commercial sector has for some educational technologies. They have almost like experimental classrooms, or they have rotating things that basically like these people are always expecting they're going to be participating in sort of experimental versions of things. So there's always sort of some ready populations to go over and work on something that looks good, to go over and help out. So those are some areas that, we've been kind of thinking about as we kind of move through. So.
If Dr. Bell, Dr. Nye, if each of you would not mind putting some contact information in the chat, or someone on your team, so folks can contact you, and maybe if they'd like to have some follow-up conversations, that would be wonderful. And Dr. Bennett, any last words you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I just said thanks very much for the time and the opportunity. Thanks a lot for the recognition on the paper. It really is some very solid work, and I'm honored to be a part of the group that got that done and to be the sponsor. And hopefully we'll get some good connections out of the time today. And I really appreciate folks sticking around and being a part of our discussion. Thank you.
Which I was going to ask, and so thank you. In your remark, you just reminded me. So Dr. Bell, best paper at ITSEC. That's impressive because there are a lot of papers submitted and presented at ITSEC. What was it about this team, this work, your paper, that resulted in you being selected as the best paper?
Well, they never really tell you, but I suspect that for one thing, it had authors from industry, government, and academia. But ITSEC is also, compared to other conferences, fairly rigorous, and I think they're always looking for findings and data and results. And we actually, we had good results. I was worried because we only had 3 evaluators because of COVID, but I think, maybe the committee gave us them all again because of the pandemic. But I think we had results, and it was very sort of multidisciplinary and collaborative. That's my guess.
Yep, I think that's right, Ben.
Excellent. I'm sure there's folks on with us today that have gone through the process as well. So any tips are real helpful. And just as a teaser for our last webinar in this 7-month series that we're going to do with NTSA, our last one is going to be about how to really get the most out of ITSEC, particularly for those of you that maybe you've not exhibited before, you've not been a whole lot, and every year it's a little bit different. But we look forward to you joining us in March for our next Tech Connect and learning about getting the story behind yet another of the ITSEC 2021 Best Paper Teams. So with that, we're going to wind this up. Dr. Bell, Dr. Nye, thank you so much for your time today and for the work you're doing to help our warfighters train more effectively. I appreciate it. And thanks to NTSA for their great partnership with TechGrow.